Hi there, thanks for tuning in. Today, we'll be doing an analysis and valuation of Taitron components, ticker symbol TAIT. And let's just jump right into it. Taitron components essentially makes discrete components, semiconductors, discretes, passives, optos, integrated circuits, and other electronics. So essentially, they're a pretty small company and they just provide this to other people. They are essentially a business to business that provides the semiconductors, so they're part of the semiconductor industry. And here I want to sort of show the importance of reading the 10K. So the 10K talks not just about the overall financial picture, but also why things changed. For example, here it's saying net sales changed from 2021 to 2022. They went down for about $200,000, right? So why did this happen? So the decrease was primarily in ODM projects and owing to lower demand. So now you have a reason why. You're seeing, if you look at just the financials, you're seeing, okay, this went down by 2.5%. But by reading the 10K and seeing the explanations the company provides, you're seeing, okay, their revenue went down because of lower demand. Gross profit, however, went up. So this happened because they continue to pass along a portion of these costs to our customers to mitigate these costs, which are impacted by tariff costs on certain products imported from China. That's also good to know. Selling general administrative expenses went up a little bit by almost 2.1%. Operating income, however, also went up by a very similar amount. And then net income at the end of the day, the bottom line was still pretty good. It's still, even from 2021 to 2022, even though revenue went down, net income went up significantly. This is also, however, because of a tax benefit that they got. They essentially got a tax break on the year 2022. So that is important to know because those are often one-time things. If the tax break was discounted from the net income in 2022, they would have made less than otherwise than in 2021. So that's important to note. It's important to account in your calculations if you're forecasting net income that there's these one-time charges such as taxes, and you can't just ignore those, right? You can't project those into the future because you can't predict how much they're going to get taxed. So let's talk a little bit about this. So Taitron operates in the United States and Asia. You see that in the United States, in the 12 months from December 31st, 2021 to 2022, their United States market share went up while their Asia market share went down. This is essentially because of lower demand in Asia. And then their ODM projects went up, but their ODM components, so the sale of individual components, went down. So the demand is being affected primarily in Asia and primarily for the components that they sell rather than the projects that they do for other people. Okay? So that sort of explains the revenue breakdown both in geographies and their product lines. Now, if you see the full picture here, after explaining why everything looks the way it looks, this is way easier to understand. And we also have the cash flow statement. So we see that they have this net income here, and this gets eventually passed to cash from operations, right? They barely have any stock-based compensation, which is great because stock-based compensation gets counted as cash from operations, but it's really an expense. It's not really cash you're getting, it's cash you're giving to others, so it really is an expense. And if you see all of this, then their cash from operations minus their capital expenditures, which is essentially this acquisition of property and equipment, would be the free cash flow. So their free cash flow is pretty high. Even in bad years or in years of decline, it's still pretty high. So that's important to know. They also give a pretty consistent dividend, albeit a little bit slow growing. This is a screenshot from Seeking Alpha. They used to give 3 cents, eventually it moved up to 4. They gave a special dividend here, and now they give 5 cents per share. So whether or not this increases anytime soon is yet to be seen, but they have been a slow and steady grower. So that's good to know. And they do give a dividend of about a little more than 5% as of right now. We also have to note that any business that operates in the semiconductor industry is subject to the semiconductor cycle. Semiconductors are cyclical, and knowing which part of the cycle we're on is key for investing in these kinds of stocks and gives an explanation for low or high PE ratios. Essentially, the major factors causing this cyclicality, and this is a paper that was written in 2019, I believe, that explains these two things. So, the major factors that cause the cyclicality in semiconductors is inventory. So, essentially, when there's increased demand, a lot of semiconductor manufacturers will make more semiconductors, they'll make more inventory. All of a sudden, because supply goes up, then the prices will go down. So essentially, that will lead to sort of a natural fluctuation in the cycle, right? There's an inventory buildup and falling prices, revenue will flow, it will fall, and then there may also be weaker demand from an inventory buildup. So there also is a big correlation with worldwide economic growth. Essentially, semiconductors are used in stuff like cars, like consumer electronics, but all sorts of other things that maybe we don't realize, right? So, whenever the world just has an economic downturn, semiconductors will have an economic downturn as well, right? So, they will be very affected by the general economy in general, and Taitron is no exception here. Now, I am going to do a discounted cash flow model here. What I'm essentially doing is grabbing this free cash flow that they've always had and just projecting it out to the future based on a pretty slow growth rate, essentially saying it drops down a little bit in the next 2 years to account for some slowdown in the semiconductor industry, and then picking back up by a very modest 1%. I want an 11% rate of return. That is to say, I want a 1% per year more than the market, if we say the market gives an average of 10% per year rate of return, and I'm going to give it a perpetual growth rate of 1%. It's just going to go 1% per year for all of eternity. This is to account for some cyclicality and to be conservative. Then I'm going to divide it by the total number of shares out, which is 6 million, and the fair value I would get for it is $2.64. However, we have to add back the net debt or net cash that they have in this case, which is $8.3 million. And after that, the fair value becomes $4.02 for Taitron. Now let's see where the stock is right now. Now, we can see it's at $3.50 right now, which is about 12.5% lower than the fair value I got of a little more than $4. And you see that there's some fluctuation here. There's definitely some cyclicality here. And there's a lot of cyclicality here. Of course, 2020 was an extraordinary year for most companies. But you'll see that there were really good points to buy it and maybe not so good points to buy it, right? So let's talk about the criteria on why you could buy Taitron or not. So the criteria for it is that it's a slow, boring, and steady company, right? It is a pretty decent grower. It has been growing revenues for the last 10 years, really, and their margins seem to be improving. Even we saw in this last annual report that even though the revenues went down, their profit margins actually held up just fine. And they actually return money to shareholders through a nice dividend of over 5%. They have no debt, and they have lots of assets such as real estate, and that gives them a high liquidation value. If they were to liquidate all their assets, they would still get a lot of cash for it, and they could get acquired by another company. They're a pretty small company. Their market cap is roughly $21 million. So a large company like Taiwan Semiconductor, for example, or Skyworks Solutions, that's a company that's worth billions of dollars, they could spend $21 million, probably more than that, maybe along 30, 35, to acquire Taitron components. So that could make it a good acquisition target. If you're invested in Taitron and they get acquired, you would get a lot of cash for that. And then growth in semiconductors means growth for Taitron. Now, there's a lot of volatility woes that could make the bear case for Taitron. Semiconductors are volatile and cyclical. This makes Taitron risky if we're on the wrong side of the cycle, right? We don't know what side of the cycle we're on necessarily. If you think semiconductor demand will lower because of the world economy or because of inventory buildup, which is what we have seen lately, then Taitron's price will go lower. They also have little to no moat, as plenty of companies make similar, if not identical products, really. So their business is going to depend on a few key customers and relationships that they have. If they lose those to competitors, they're in big trouble. So there's inherent risk in all of that. And they are, as I said before, very sensitive to a global economic downturn. So the thing is, Taitron in absolute numbers may look very interesting, but if you were to invest in this, I would do very diligent research on the semiconductor cycle and where exactly we are right now in the semiconductor cycle. That could be, if you want to dive further into the stock, your next point of research. So, my whole takeaway here is that you have to know your place in the cycle. Taitron may be great to buy in that low point in the cycle where everybody hates it, but demand for semiconductors is picking back up, right? But if we're in that place where maybe demand is cooling down and inventory is building up, then Taitron is probably not a buy. So it's important to know your place in the cycle, and for these stocks that are seeing cyclicality, you have to research the industry as well. Okay? So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see me analyze any particular stock, feel free to comment down below. I'd be happy to take a look, and I read every single comment. With that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Remember to like and subscribe, and please enjoy.